Hi YouTube, this is Travis, and hopefully you just checked out my deck profile for my Blue Eyes White Dragon decks for this format. This deck profile is going to be a little bit different because in addition to profiling my anti-meta deck, I wanted to talk for just a moment about the meta of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. So the meta, what we're looking at, probably going into the next big tournaments, going to focus on Burning Abyss, Stellar Knights, and the Shaddolls. So these three decks all have a lot of things in common, and they do have some differences, but one thing I've noticed about them is they all generate some kind of free advantage. As we've moved forward in Yu-Gi-Oh! It seems like we've gone from Black Wings to Lightsworn to Plants to all these different formats, and a lot of things that these decks have in common is not only are they fast, and not only are they combo based like Mermails, but they also have a control aspect to them, and they also generate a lot of +1s. That's the whole point. And if you can outplus your opponent, you can get to your cards faster. And then all it takes is a little bit of skill, and you can make a deck that wins a big YCS or a big tournament. So that's sort of what I had in my mind when I was building an anti-meta deck. This is a Fire Fist anti-meta deck. I thought Fire Fist would be a great engine to combat the meta because this deck is about generating pluses as well. I sort of had that as my focus. And if you can generate enough pluses to keep up with your opponent and their playstyle, as well as using these anti-meta cards that completely shut down whatever they're trying to do, seems like you can compete with the current meta. I haven't tested this deck out against the new deck types from Duelist Alliance, like the Burning Abyss and Stellar Knights, but I used those sort of prototypes when I was constructing it. Because I know how those decks play. Burning Abyss, you want to get free monsters on the board, you want to make Dante, you want to get through your deck as fast as possible. Stellar Knights, you want to set up your graveyard, special summon your monsters, and then make really cool rate 4 plays and make big pushes. And Shaddolls are just absolutely ridiculous. They're all over the place, fusion summoning, bringing back that element to Yu-Gi-Oh! So let's get right into the deck, and I'll kind of tell you why I chose certain cards. So for the Fire Fist engine, we have 3 Bear and 2 Gorilla. Now, the reason I chose these cards are because Gorilla pops spell and traps and Bear pops monsters and gives you advantage. Whenever Bear does battle damage, you get to set a Tenki, you can set Tensen, whatever you need. And Gorilla is a great counterpart to Bear, and they just create their own sort of advantage. It's part of the reason why the engines included in this deck is because this deck is built to keep up with what other decks are doing. So you'll get to see the Tenkis later on. Anyway, 3 Banisher of the Radius. I cannot stress how important Banisher is. Banisher keeps your opponent from the graveyard, from using their graveyard cards. It really wrecks Stellar Knights because they revolve around special summoning from the graveyard. It really wrecks Shaddolls because Shaddolls don't want to have their pieces banished. So as long as you can protect Banisher, it's going to be really helpful to you. Now as far as the rest of the anti-meta part, I have 1 Fossil Dyna, 1 Thunder King, and 2 Kaiku. Now Kaiku sort of does what Banisher does. Whenever he does battle damage, you can just banish your opponent's monsters from their graveyard, and that really wrecks a lot of decks. Thunder King is Thunder King. That's been the anti-meta card forever, really. If he would go to 2, this deck would be so much better. I a lot of times wish I could draw into him. There was a way to search him out, but Fossil Dyna does what it does. Whenever it gets flipped, it really hurts their field. You don't have to special summon a ton in this deck. You can, but for the most part, you normal summon and you deal with them with your powerful anti-meta based monsters. So Fossil Dyna at 1's doing pretty good. I've played against more traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Styles like Lightsworns, and Lightsworns play a similar style to the new stuff, except they're not quite as fast. So. And they lose to Shaddolls really bad. So. Alright, for the other monsters, I play 3 Neos Alias. Now, the reason for playing Neos Alias is not for Miracle Fusion. It's not for the Mass Change, the stuff that's coming up. Neos Alias is for Gemini Spark. When you think about Gemini Spark, you think of it defensively. If they target your Neos Alias with some kind of destruction effect, you can chain your Spark and you can get a plus off of it. And that's the point, because you get to draw a new card, you get to pop something of theirs, and then their destruction effect is basically useless. If it gets Fiendish Chain, just play Spark. And there's 3 alias. I didn't include any other Gemini monster. If you draw a dead one, that's just something you have to live with. But there are very few moments in this deck whenever you're going to end up doing that. I do play, I think, 2 Sparks. That part's coming up, though. 1 Murmello. Trap Tricks Murmello is an interesting card for me. I have a love-hate relationship with it. Other than the effect of adding a card to your hand, it's really not all that amazing. But he's not destroyed by other whole cards, so that kind of makes Hat and some other decks a little bit tough to deal with him. Obviously, they have other ways to deal with him, but Trap Tricks Murmello gives you a plus, and that's why he's in the deck. Helps you search out a trap card that can put you ahead. And you can play 2 of Murmello. You can take out the other Fossil Dino. That's one thing about anti-meta. There are so many ways to play it. You just have to base your choices on what the meta is playing. Alright, for the spell cards, we have Defissure, which is a little bit obvious. You don't want your opponent to have access to the grave. You don't need access to yours, so don't give them access to theirs, and it hurts a lot of decks. For the fire formations, I have 3 Tinky, because Tinky gives you a plus. You draw out your monster, and then if you destroy something with Bear and do damage, you get to set another one. 1 Tensu, and 1 Gyoko. Or Gyokao, however you pronounce it. Gyoko. Tensu, Gyokao, and Tinky are really the main fire formation cards that you want to play in the deck. You can add the trap cards too, or you can add more copies of the other ones. But since you're only playing 5 Fire Fist monsters, I wanted to limit the spell cards to that number. And they all have helpful effects. Obviously, Tinky's the one you want because it searches. And the whole point of the deck is to stay in good shape with your hand. So I also play 1 Rhoda. Rhoda gets you to your Alias, and once you have Alias in hand and you have a Spark, then you already have a play that will put you ahead of your opponent the next turn. So 1 Rhoda is a good card, especially on this. I think that's the only thing that it searches, but that's really the only thing you need. I play 2 Supply Squad. I honestly, my only regret in building this now is not playing 3. Supply Squad's an awesome card. It just gives you unwarranted advantage. I love the card. I wish I had another one. But I also play 2 Spark, which is another draw card. Like I said, you set it, you make a defensive play out of it. If they use a destruction effect on your Alias, hey, you get to draw 1 and then pop something of your choosing. So, quick play is always good. And that's all for the spell lineup. It's all about generating advantage. That's all it is. So, 3 Deep Prism, 3 Phoenix Chain. These cards go without explanation. Phoenix Chain is just going to stop them from making a push that's going to win them the game. Deep Prison, the same thing. Whenever they have a big monster like a Construct, a Winda, Deltaros, whatever, you're going to see Dante. You chain your Deep Prison and you can make mincemeat of them, so to speak. And 1 Macrocosmos, it just goes with Dimensional Fissure. Helps seal off the grave so you can keep those decks from doing what they do. Basically, you stop them from playing the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is always good with this deck. Alright, you got Black Horn of Heaven. I only play 1. I think 1's a great tech choice. It's not exactly a necessary in every deck, but there are a lot of special summonings going on. You're not too concerned about it. As long as you have a Defissure up, it'll just be banished immediately, so yeah. Alright, for Murmello's targets, I have 1 Bottomless and 1 Trap Hole. I would suggest, instead of playing Trap Hole, I'm a budget player. I don't have Trap Tricks, Trap Hole Nightmare, or Deep Dark Trap Hole, but I would suggest a Deep Dark Trap Hole in place of that Trap Hole. You run 2 targets because Bottomless is always good, and if you can't search Bottomless, you can search this. So make this a Deep Dark Trap Hole, or maybe Trap Hole Nightmare, and take out the standard one. And then the other big 3, 1 Torrential, 1 Compulse, and 1 Warning. Those are just cards that disrupt your opponent. So ultimately, I hope this anti-meta deck, as far as the main deck, is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically about getting to cards that are going to be helpful to you, not helpful to them, and keep you up to speed. So for the extra deck, it's kind of standard. 1 Zenmains and 1 Levier. Those are the only 2 rank 3s. I think you go for Zenmains a lot more often. But Levier will open up the opportunity for other special summons, because you can obviously special summon something from the Banish Zone and then make another play. And Banisher, I think, is the card that's going to make those for you. You don't make them often. Cowboy, Emerald, Lavalval Chain, Maestroke. Use Exciton if you have it. I don't have it. Paladynamo. You can make him with 2 Alias. Another example of an Alias Exceed is Blade Armor Ninja, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Diamond Dyer, Castell, great replacement for 101. If you have both, play both because they're awesome. Heartland Draco, just to troll your opponent. Corn, just to troll your opponent. And then the Fire Fist cards, I have 1 Cardinal and 2 Tiger King. And these are the new Platinum rares. If you haven't seen them yet, they're very bright. Kind of hard to see the card actually with all that foil. Okay, so the reason for playing Blade Armor Ninja. The only way to make Blade Armor Ninja as this deck is if you have 2 Neos Alias. Now, a lot of times you're going to find yourself using Gemini Spark with Neos Alias because that's the reason he's in the deck. If you can make Blade Armor Ninja, I prefer him to Excalibur. You get to attack twice with him. It can be a game ender. If you summon this guy and your opponent has 4,000 or less life points and you can find a way to get to those points, Blade Armor Ninja can win the game. I have Excalibur. I considered playing him, but I ultimately chose this. The extra deck for anti-meta decks is not used that often. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. You don't need it, usually, because your opponents are usually so far behind that they can't deal with what's on the field. But they're there if you do. And because you're playing Tinkies and you're playing the Fire Fist cards, play the Fire Fist Exceed monsters, Cardinal and the 2 Tiger Kings, and they give you even more advantage and put big boss monsters on the field. Alright, so that's my anti-meta deck for this format, and just a little bit of a discussion on how I think the meta is shaping up. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comment section. Obviously, you can play Silvery Calcos, you can play an extra Fossil Dyna, you can take out the Alias altogether. I even started building this deck with Guardian Eatos because you have so much banished stuff in there. If you play Eatos, go ahead and play Skill Drain and the Beast King Barbaros. And that'll just make it even better. And you might even want to throw in a trade in or two. There are a million ways to play anti-meta, but when you build your anti-meta deck, think about the current meta and what's going to benefit you the most. And if you have an engine like Fire Fist that generates advantage, go for it, because that's the kind of engine that's going to win the game. Alright, so leave your feedback, like the video if you enjoyed it. Tell me, guys, what you think of the anti-meta type world in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, and what do you think is going to win games. And go out there and duel hard. Alright, I'm signing out.